January 15th, 1919. Boston was experiencing an ordinary winter afternoon. People walked through the streets, horse-drawn wagons moved between brick buildings, and workers continued their daily routines. But near the waterfront stood something enormous. A giant steel storage tank filled with thousands of tons of molasses. At the time, the tank was an important part of the city's industrial activity. Nobody on the streets knew that within minutes, this massive structure would become the center of one of the strangest disasters in American history. Shortly after noon, the enormous tank suddenly failed. Its steel walls ruptured, and instead of water or fire, something completely unexpected came rushing into the streets. Molasses. A huge wave of thick, dark brown liquid pushed outward from the tank. It moved through the surrounding neighborhood with enormous force. Wooden structures broke apart. Carts were pushed aside. People nearby suddenly found themselves trying to escape a disaster they had never imagined possible. Within moments, the streets had been transformed. The thick wave spread through the neighborhood. It surrounded buildings, damaged structures, and swept debris through the streets. Unlike water, molasses was extremely heavy and sticky. Moving through it was incredibly difficult. People tried to escape, while others rushed to help. The disaster left parts of the neighborhood covered in a thick layer of brown liquid and debris. When the flow finally stopped, the scene was almost impossible to recognize. What had been an ordinary Boston street only minutes earlier had become a disaster zone. Rescue workers and local volunteers quickly arrived. They searched through the damaged streets and tried to reach people trapped in the aftermath. The thick molasses made everything harder. Workers had to move carefully through the sticky material while clearing debris and damaged structures. The scale of the disaster soon became clear. The event had caused enormous destruction and claimed many lives. But another question was beginning to emerge. How could a giant industrial tank fail so catastrophically? Investigators began examining the remains of the tank. They studied the steel walls, the rivets, the supports, and the way the structure had been constructed. Attention eventually turned toward the tank's design and construction. Could the structure have been too weak for the enormous pressure inside? Had warning signs been ignored? The disaster eventually became the subject of a major legal battle. And the case helped draw attention to an important issue. Industrial structures could not simply be built and trusted. They needed careful engineering, testing, and oversight. The Great Molasses Flood became one of the strangest disasters in American history. A substance normally associated with food had become a deadly industrial force. But the tragedy also left behind an important lesson. Modern cities depend on enormous structures containing dangerous amounts of energy and materials. When those structures fail, the consequences can be catastrophic. More than a century later, Boston has changed dramatically. The old industrial landscape is largely gone. The streets are different. The city has moved forward. But the story remains. On one winter afternoon in 1919, a giant tank broke apart and a wave of molasses swept through Boston. It sounds almost impossible, but it really happened.